Owning a pet is one of the greatest things life has to offer. No matter the animal, they're loving, usually soft companions that bring joy and comfort to millions of people around the world. Having a pet isn't always without problems, though. They can tear up your stuff, lower your property value, and just generally cause a lot of issues. I think that animals are always worth this trouble, but for those who want a pet without the mess, toy companies produced the creative solution of robotic pets. The Wikipedia article for robotic pets cites the Furby as the first robotic pet created by Tiger Electronics in 1998. I personally think they look like a Mogwai and Birdie the McDonaldland character produced some cursed hybrid spawn together, but despite their looks, these Furbies were one of the hottest toys of the late 90s to early 2000s. Over 40 million Furbies were sold during the 3 years of its original production, and it had speaking capabilities translated into 24 languages. So what was the big deal about these gremlin birdies? Well, they were aimed to be domestic robots meant for personal use inside the home. The original slogan of their 1998 release really explains it all. "The more you play with me, the more I do. I will keep amazing you." This slogan rang about as true as you could hope 90s technology would. A new Furby hatched fresh from its packaging started out speaking entirely Furbish, a unique language that all Furbies use, but starts using English or its origin's native language, words and phrases in place of Furbish over time the more it's interacted with. It simulates raising a child, although a furry alien one, by resembling the process of actually learning a new language. The pet aspect of the Furby comes from petting its fuzzy little head, or entire body? Where's the neck on this thing? By petting a Furby, they're encouraged to learn more and continue to interact with their owner, even moving their eyes, ears, and feet in response. I had what I'd call a lesser Furby from a Burger King kids meal as a child, but I honestly only ever remember being creeped out by these things. The kids meal toys came in a little cardboard carrying case similar to a cat carrier or something a newly adopted pet would come in, and honestly, that carrier was half the gimmick of these lesser Furbies. They're fully plastic, no fur, but they do come with just as freakish eyes that move when you shake them in that classic blinking baby doll style, and have a button on the back that makes their ears move when it's pressed. What I'm trying to get at is that I never hopped on the Furby train myself because I only had the lesser Furby to base my opinion on, but I don't think the real thing would have creeped me out any less. They still make Furbies today, with 3 additional, more technologically advanced versions being produced since 1998. There's also a weird trend in recent years of making cursed Furbies with different parts, and that's all I'm gonna say about that. But what if your dream pet isn't an English-speaking abomination? Plenty of people, understandably, prefer the more traditional animal of a dog or a cat, something a bit fuzzier that won't stare into your soul. Although Wikipedia tells us that the Furby was the first robotic pet, I beg to differ. For the dog lovers, let me introduce Wrinkles, a barking, panting pet created in 1981 by Ganz Bros, the company that would later go on to introduce Webkinz into the world. Wrinkles is a trademarked character of Ganz, but despite having other stuffed animals and puppets of him, this electronic form really brought him to life in ways that a hand inside of him couldn't. The words on his box tell us that he can respond to touch and voice commands with barking and panting, even with a panting action moving tongue. While I don't think his eyes are that much less soulless than a Furby's, this little guy at least functions as more of a pet, and like a real animal at that. Dog lovers rejoice! Wrinkles doesn't have a beak and will still give you a little serotonin boost for petting him. But as Wikipedia doesn't even mention Wrinkles anywhere in the article for robotic pets, I think it's safe to say that unfortunately, Wrinkles the barking, panting pet didn't exactly take off. And with Wrinkles being a toy of the 80s, by 1998 when the Furby was introduced, was there anything that could satisfy the dog lovers of the world that still wanted a mess-free pet experience? Well, yes and no. The Aibo was a robotic dog produced by Sony and released in 1999, just a year after Furby's debut. The Aibo could do what Wrinkles couldn't. For starters, it could actually move around. And software even more complex than Furby's enabled it to see its environment through a camera, recognize spoken commands, at least in English, Spanish, or Japanese, and develop somewhat of a personality. In other words, Wrinkles walked, or just panted, so that Aibo could run. Despite its hard-hitting technology, features, and success, you'll still notice that Aibo is missing something important: fur. Wrinkles was at least soft-ish to the touch, and Furby admittedly does appeal a bit more when it's covered in synthetic hair. The formula for the perfect fuzzy robotic pet would finally be close to perfected when FurReal Friends would come into the picture in 2002. The FurReal Friends cat was created by Hasbro and Tiger Electronics, the same maker of the Furby. They improved upon the robotic pet design by making a pet that more closely simulated an actual animal that would be in someone's home. The cat had multiple spots to be petted, but if touched too roughly, he'd get pissed. The cat would also respond negatively to pulling on its tail, reacting with a raised tail and hissing. So this cat does meow, but it doesn't respond to commands or move around its environment. But what is notable is that the FurReal toy line would go on to be one of the most prominent collections of robotic pets over the next few years. By the mid to late 2000s, there was a clear culture and desire around robotic or otherwise electronic pets. Websites like Webkinz and Neopets, among others, were popular for players that wanted a pet to care for without the hassle. And for those people who still wanted a physical pet experience without the troubles of actual pet ownership, there was finally an expanding market of robotic toys, arguably headlined by FurReal Friends. The lone cat that started the line was now accompanied by other cats that could knead, purr, drink milk, and move their heads and bodies more. Dogs also got a similar lineup. They could now hold bones, do tricks, and play with toys. There was a particular FurReal dog that could even accompany you on a walk, GoGo My Walkin Pup. As a kid, I wanted this dog so bad, and I made sure to put it on my Christmas list for years. My family didn't end up getting a real dog until I was 14, so I was definitely missing some quality pet time, and clearly, I hoped for GoGo to fill that void for me. I don't know what it was about this toy specifically that captured my attention so much, especially because when I look at it now, he doesn't really do much. I think part of it had to do with the fact that I remember one of the girls in the commercials for it having the same name as me, which I guess meant it was destiny to my 6-year-old brain. Unfortunately, I never did get a walk-in pup of my own, not until I had a real dog that I had to take on real walks. Ugh, so annoying. I wanted a robot that I could ignore for most of the day and that didn't have the capacity to actually love me. For all the other kids who were lucky enough to get a robotic pet and were stupid enough to not choose GoGo, Hasbro continued to create even more variations of FurReal Friends over the years. There was everything from common pets like birds and guinea pigs, to farm animals like lambs and piglets, to woodland animals like rabbits and chipmunks, which, I just have to say, coincidentally came out right around the release of Alvin and the Chipmunks. I'm assuming this was more of an opportunity taken than any kind of partnership, but I bet it definitely helped any parent who suddenly had kids asking to go into the forest so they could catch and keep a little Alvin of their own. There are a few standouts to me out of all of these pets, starting with the birds. I don't know why these seem more creative than the cats and dogs, but they just seem cute, even if they came with a bottle of milk that birds totally drink. I have to say that the baby duckling was a bit of a flop though, still according to me, because that thing just looks like a seagull and should have come with a french fry as an accessory. Another creative mention is the butterscotch pony of 2007. Now, this might look like any other robotic horse, but this pony could actually be sat on and ridden, given that the user was small enough. It even won a couple of awards in 2007 for being the best girls' toy and the most innovative toy of the year, and I'll give it to them, it definitely beats those plastic horses with the springs. Butterscotch and S'mores, the rideable robotic ponies, did retail for about $300 US back in 2007 though, so you had to be a really dedicated horse girl to convince your parents to buy this for you. FurReal Friends even ventured into making exotic animal pets with big cat cubs, bear cubs, and chimpanzees available for all the Tiger King wannabes out there. The biggest appeal here is that obviously these robotic animals are infinitely safer and just generally more available than their real-life counterparts, so I can see why they'd venture into this direction. There were other robotic pets over the years made by other brands and companies, but if you knew about robotic animals during this time, you likely associated the trend with FurReal Friends. So all of this sounds like a win-win for everyone so far. Companies can profit from innovative and creative toys, and children who've always wanted a certain animal for a pet that couldn't get their hands on a real one now had a toy as a decent replacement. But I'd like to think that there's this rule that applies to pretty much everything in the world, and that is, if it exists, there's likely some sort of controversy tied to it. Fortunately, for all the dedicated robot pet owners across the world, the controversy around them is relatively light. Some people argue that robotic pets in place of a real animal can cause confusion when used by the elderly, and especially victims of diseases like dementia. They may not realize that the animal they're caring for isn't actually alive, which might make them upset if the robot doesn't respond like a real animal or eventually becomes broken. But I'd like to raise a counterpoint to that despite this valid concern, isn't it better for animal lovers to have access to the pet-owning experience with robotic animals when they otherwise couldn't? I think anyone who wants to have something to care for and cuddle should have the option, even if it's a more limited one. As for the main demographic of children that these toys are targeted towards, you could make a similar argument. At the end of the day, these robot replacements don't function as actual animals would, try as they might. If a younger user ends up trying to treat a real animal as carelessly as they might their toys, there could be some dangerous outcomes, from the animal getting distressed and reacting aggressively to the child just creating a bad environment for an animal to live in. With all of this in mind, are robotic pets even ethical? Arguably, yes. I'd say they provide way more comfort and entertainment than they do opportunities for misbehaving children. Stuffed animals are also a good alternative for real animals, but to have a little toy respond to your touch and call is something that only these robotic pets could mimic in the real thing. As for creating relationships between children and real animals, there were a few studies held back in 2004 and 2005 when the trend for robotic pets was starting to fully take off. Children were allowed to play with an Aibo, a stuffed animal, and a real dog. At the end of their playtime, most of the children responded that all the 3 dogs were alive, could hear verbal commands, were capable of being a companion, had feelings, and weren't okay to hurt if they did something wrong. So maybe we weren't giving young kids enough credit. They can recognize the purpose of robotic pets enough to treat them as if they're a living thing. In other words, treating them with respect and care even if they're not actually alive. And despite these answers, the children also responded more to the real dog and treated it like a living thing more than the toys. This shows that even if they feel like a robotic pet like an Aibo can hear them and be their friend, they recognize the real dog as a better companion and something that needs more looking after and attention than a piece of plastic. And in the same vein, you could argue that robotic pets also teach children responsibility, with some toys teaching lessons on where not to touch a certain animal, and showing that they need food and compassion to thrive. So yeah, I'd say the controversies with robotic pets are pretty limited. Honestly, I think the biggest controversy with these things is that they're usually pretty overpriced, but that's just me. So what happened to the trend of robotic pets? They are still around today, but I'd say that their production has slowed down a little since the mid-2000s. FurReal still makes animals like a kangaroo, a kisser whale, and for a more urban fantasy vibe, there's also a unicorn and a dragon. Other companies have put out pets that actually hatch from the egg they're packaged in, and dinosaurs, so no matter a kid's animal or creature preference, there's probably some toy out there for them. And since the technology age has developed, there's only been more suspicion and fear garnered around artificial intelligence, despite the fact that it's only getting more, well, intelligent. This might have actually hindered the draw of robotic pets, though I'd say the rise of actual pet adoptions over the pandemic has also lessened the need for robotic replacements. But despite knowing the love of a real dog, I still think there's something nostalgic and fun to be found in these robotic pets. Maybe now that I can make my own money and decisions as an adult, I might just have to finally get my hands on my precious GoGo after all of these years. Just don't tell my cat, or he'll get jealous.